The air in the room had a specific smell. It wasn't just the stale coffee from the mug I'd forgotten on the drafting table, or the ozone tang of the printer that had been running all morning. It was the scent of rain-soaked wool and something else, something sharp and metallic, like fear. I remember that most clearly. The smell, and the weight of the paper in my hands. It was heavier than it should have been, as if the ink itself was made of lead. I was standing in the middle of our shared apartment in Portland's Pearl District, the one we'd saved for years to afford. Outside, a persistent November drizzle slicked the streets, blurring the city lights into watercolor streaks. It was our city, Liam's and mine. We were going to build things here, real things, things that mattered. The papers in my hand were blueprints, but they weren't our blueprints. They were a bastardization, a corrupted, commercialized ghost of the project that had consumed the last 3 years of my life. Our life, the Havenwood Project. My thesis, my passion, my final, defining submission for my architectural licensure. A sustainable, low-income, co-housing community designed to foster real connection, built with reclaimed materials and passive solar design. It was my heart, rendered in ink and paper. And here it was, in Liam's satchel, which he'd forgotten in his rush to a client meeting. The title block was different. The client was a corporate developer I despised, a company known for clear-cutting forests to build soulless McMansions. My name was gone. In its place, alongside Liam's, was another name, Chloe. My Chloe. My maid of honor to be. My best friend since we were 2 awkward girls in Bend, Oregon, drawing dream houses in the dirt with sticks. The one who held my hair back when I had the flu, who proofread my essays, who knew every secret I had. My lungs seized. It felt like the entire apartment, our carefully curated life of mid-century furniture and overflowing bookshelves, was a vacuum, sucking the air from my body. I sank onto the arm of our sofa, the blueprints crinkling in my white-knuckled grip. It wasn't just the professional betrayal, the theft of my intellectual property. It was the neat, confident signature of my fiancé next to the neat, bubbly signature of my best friend on a document that was designed to erase me. I laid the pages out on our coffee table, my heart hammering a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. The elegant curves of my original design were gone, replaced with cheaper, boxier structures. The community garden was now a parking lot. The reclaimed timber was replaced with vinyl siding. They had taken my soul and sold it for parts. My first thought, strangely, was a practical one. This doesn't make sense. We were a team. We were Liam and Alara and Liam, an inseparable unit since we were 16. We'd survived long distance while I was at the University of Oregon and he was at Oregon State. We'd moved to Portland together, got junior positions at competing firms, and spent our nights and weekends building our own dream on the side. Havenwood wasn't just my project, it was our future. We were going to start our own firm after this. We were going to get married in the spring. My dress was hanging in the closet of my childhood bedroom. The key turned in the lock. My body went rigid. Liam walked in, shaking the rain from his coat. He was beautiful in that effortless, sun-kissed Oregon way. Even flushed from the cold, he looked like the hero of a story. My story. "Hey," he said, smiling. "That meeting ran long. I'm starving. You want to order from that Thai place?" He hadn't seen the blueprints on the table. His eyes were on me, and his smile faltered. "Elle? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." My voice was a whisper. "I think I have, the ghost of my career." I pointed a trembling finger at the table. The color drained from his face. The easy charm vanished, replaced by a shuttered, guarded expression I'd never seen before. It was like watching a mask drop. "Hilera, I can explain." Those 4 words. The coward's anthem. The killer of 1,000 beautiful things. "Explain what, Liam?" I managed, my voice cracking. "Explain how my thesis project, the one I poured my blood and sanity into, ends up in your bag with my name stripped off it and Chloe stamped on like she's some kind of visionary? Explain how the soul of the entire design was ripped out and replaced with With this strip mall garbage? It's not garbage, he said, his voice low and defensive. It's viable. It's getting built. The developer loved the pitch. The pitch? What pitch? The last I heard, we were pitching to the city council for a grant. We were going to do this the right way. He ran a hand through his damp hair, avoiding my eyes. That was never going to work, Alara. You know that. Your version was a pipe dream. It was financially impossible. Beautiful, yeah, but impossible. A fantasy. A fantasy. He said it with such casual cruelty, as if he were discussing the weather. He was dismissing not just my work, but my entire worldview. The part of me that believed you could be successful and have integrity. The part of me he always claimed to love the most. So you and Chloe decided to make it possible behind my back? He finally looked at me, and there was no remorse in his eyes. There was frustration, annoyance, like I was a problem to be managed. Chloe has a pragmatic mind. She saw the potential for what it could be. We reworked it, we made it marketable. The name hanging in the air between us. Chloe. I'm going to call her, I said, my voice eerily calm. I felt detached, like I was floating above the scene, watching two strangers have a conversation that would end a world. Don't, he said, a flicker of panic in his eyes. Let's just talk about this. But I was already dialing. My thumb hovered over her name. Chloe Bear, a stupid nickname from when we were kids. I pressed it. It rang once, twice. Hey, Elle, what's up? Her voice was bright, bubbly, exactly as it always was. The sound of it was a physical blow. I couldn't speak. I just held the phone out, my eyes locked on Liam's. Hello? Ilara, you there? Chloe's cheerful voice chirped from the speaker. Liam's face was a mess of guilt and desperation. He reached for the phone, but I snatched it back. I found my voice. It came out cold and dead. I found the blueprints, Chloe. Silence. A long, humming silence on the other end of the line. Then a shaky breath. Oh. Oh? I repeated, a hysterical laugh bubbling in my chest. That's all you have to say? 3 years of me talking your ear off about every detail, every beam, every window placement. Me crying on your shoulder when I thought the structural calculations were going to kill me. You telling me it was brilliant, telling me I was going to change the world. And you just say, oh? It's not what you think, she stammered. The practiced brightness gone, replaced by a thin, reedy tone. Isn't it? I looked at Liam. I think it's exactly what I think. 2 people I trust most in the world decided my dream wasn't profitable enough, so you stole it. We didn't steal it, Liam cut in, his voice rising. We adapted it. We made it better. You made it cheaper, Liam. You made it soulless. Then the final piece of the puzzle slid into place. A memory from 2 months ago. My parents at our dinner table. My dad, a retired contractor, looking over the budget I'd meticulously prepared. My mom, a bookkeeper, frowning with concern. It's a lot of money, honey, my dad had said. These reclaimed materials, the specialized labor, it's a big risk. The biggest risks have the biggest rewards, Dad, I'd said, full of fire and conviction. This is about more than money. They had invested. A significant chunk of their retirement savings was tied up in the initial phase, securing the land option. A risk they took because they believed in me. Or so I thought. A cold dread, colder than the rain outside, washed over me. I ended the call with Chloe without another word and immediately dialed my mother. She answered on the second ring. Alara. Honey, is everything all right? Mom, I said, my voice flat. Did you know about Liam and Chloe's new version of the Havenwood project? The silence on her end was different from Chloe's. It wasn't guilty surprise. It was the heavy, knowing silence of someone who had been holding a secret. Your father and I, we talked to Liam, she said carefully. He showed us the new proposal. Ilara, it's a sure thing. The developer is solid. Our investment is safe. In fact, it's going to give us a much better return. I literally could not breathe. I bent over, clutching my stomach, the phone pressed hard against my ear. The betrayal wasn't a simple love triangle. It wasn't a professional backstabbing. It was a conspiracy. A quiet, rational, family-approved coup. They had all decided in hushed tones and private meetings that my vision, my ethics, myself was the liability. I was the problem they had to solve. "So you knew?" I gasped. "You knew they cut me out? You knew they stole my work?" "Honey, try to be reasonable." My mother's voice was placating, the tone she used when I was a teenager throwing a tantrum. "It's still your beautiful idea at its core, but it's practical now. We were worried, sweetheart. We were worried you were getting in over your head. Liam was worried. He did this to protect you, to protect us, to protect you." The words echoed in the cavern that had opened up inside my chest. He hadn't done it to me. He'd done it for me. In their twisted, horrifying logic, this act of profound violence was an act of care. I hung up the phone. I looked at Liam, who was standing there, his face a mask of strained justification. He was waiting for me to scream, to cry, to throw something. He was waiting for the familiar melodrama of a fight. I did none of those things. I walked into our bedroom, the room where we had slept and dreamed together for 4 years. I pulled my suitcase from the top of the closet. I opened the drawers and methodically, silently, began to pack. My clothes, my books, my toiletries. I didn't take anything he had given me. I didn't take any of the things we had bought together. I was excising myself from the life we had built, one folded t-shirt at a time. He followed me, his voice a desperate plea. "Ilara, talk to me! Don't do this! Where are you going to go?" I zipped the suitcase. I walked past him, out of the bedroom, through the living room where the ghost of my project lay scattered on the table. I paused at the door and finally looked at him. "I used to think the worst thing in the world would be to lose you," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "I was wrong. The worst thing is to realize you never really knew you at all." I walked out the door and didn't look back. The rain hit my face cold and sharp, and for a moment, it was the only thing I could feel. I had no idea where I was going. I had $37 in my bank account and a suitcase full of clothes. I had just lost my fiancé, my best friend, my family, and my life's work in the span of about 20 minutes. The structure of my life, the blueprint I had so carefully designed, hadn't just cracked. It had been dynamited, and I was standing in the rubble. The collapse wasn't a dramatic, cinematic event. It was a slow, quiet sinking. It was the color leaching out of the world. It was the taste of ash in my mouth when I tried to eat. I ended up in a dingy, furnished studio apartment in the southeast, the kind with peeling linoleum and a permanent smell of damp and old grease. The rent was cheap, paid for by the humiliating cashing out of a small savings bond my grandmother had left me. My world shrank to the size of those 4 walls. I quit my job at Bridgeport Design Group. I couldn't bear it. The sympathetic looks, the questions I couldn't answer, the very act of sitting at a drafting table felt like pressing a thumb into a fresh wound. Architecture was a language I could no longer speak. The vocabulary of load-bearing walls and stress tolerances, of beauty and function, was meaningless. What was the point of designing buildings for people to live in when my own inner architecture had crumbled to dust? My days were formless. I'd wake up when the light filtering through the grimy window became too bright to ignore. I'd stare at the water-stained ceiling, tracing the cracks, seeing them as a map of my own ruin. Sleep was a mercy, but it rarely came. Most nights, I'd lie awake, replaying the conversations, the betrayals, turning them over and over in my mind like a smooth, poisoned stone. My mother's placating voice, Liam's frustrated justifications, Chloe's single, damning "oh." They tried to reach me, of course. A barrage of texts and voicemails, Liam alternating between begging and anger. Chloe sending long, rambling apologies filled with excuses about pressure and confusion. My parents leaving messages that were a masterclass in emotional gaslighting. "We're so worried about you, Ilara. Why are you being so dramatic? We did what was best for everyone." I blocked their numbers, all of them. The silence that followed was vast and terrifying, but it was better than the noise of their lies. The loneliness was a physical presence. It sat on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I'd walk through the streets of Portland, a city I once loved, and feel like a ghost. I'd see couples holding hands, friends laughing over coffee, and a wave of such profound alienation would wash over me that I'd have to duck into a doorway to catch my breath. I was 27 years old, and I was utterly, completely alone. I had built my entire life on 3 pillars: Liam, Chloe, and my family, and all of them had collapsed at once. I had no one left to call. Is depression a patient thief? It doesn't take everything at once. It takes things piece by piece. It took my appetite. Food was tasteless, a chore. I lost weight until my clothes hung off my frame and my face looked sharp and unfamiliar in the mirror. It took my hobbies. I sold my expensive architecture textbooks and my drafting tools online for a fraction of their worth. The sight of them was an accusation. It took my ability to focus. I'd try to read a book and the words would just swim on the page. My lowest point came about 3 months in. It was a Tuesday. I hadn't spoken to another human being in 4 days. My money was running out. I was lying on the lumpy mattress, and I had this sudden vivid image of myself just fading away, dissolving into the greasy wallpaper until there was nothing left. The thought didn't scare me. That's what scared me. The absence of fear, the complete and total apathy. I realized with a clarity that cut through the fog that I had 2 choices. I could dissolve, or I could do something. Anything. The next day, I forced myself out of bed. I put on the least dirty clothes I could find and walked out the door with no destination in mind. I just walked. I walked for hours, past thrift stores and dive bars, past community gardens and homeless encampments. I ended up in front of an old, dusty bookstore called The Last Page. A help wanted sign, faded and crooked, was taped to the window. I walked inside. The air smelled of paper and time and dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. An old man with a kind, wrinkled face and ink-stained fingers sat behind the counter. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I saw the sign," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. I can work hard. I'm a fast learner." He looked me over, his gaze gentle but perceptive. He saw the hollows under my eyes, the way my hands trembled slightly. He saw a broken person. But for some reason, he didn't turn me away. He hired me. 20 hours a week, minimum wage, shelving books and running the cash register. That job saved my life. It was mindless work, but it was work. It gave my days a sliver of structure. Wake up, shower, walk to the bookstore, say hello to Arthur, the owner. Spend hours in the quiet company of stories. The anonymity was a balm. I was no longer Ilara, the promising young architect who had suffered a spectacular fall from grace. I was just the quiet girl who worked at the bookstore. Arthur never asked about my past. He'd just leave a cup of tea for me on the counter or recommend a book he thought I might like. I started reading again, not architecture, but fiction, poetry, philosophy. I lost myself in other worlds, in other people's struggles and triumphs. I read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and sobbed in the back room. I read Mary Oliver's poetry and felt the first stirrings of something other than pain. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Slowly, very slowly, I started to search. I wasn't looking for a new career or a new love. I was looking for a reason. I started going to therapy. My first session with Dr. Anya Sharma was excruciating. I sat there for 20 minutes, unable to speak, just crying silently. She didn't push. She just sat with me in the silence, creating a space where it was okay to be broken. "You've experienced a profound structural failure," she told me in our 3rd session, using a metaphor she knew I'd understand. The foundation, the beams, the walls, everything you built your identity on was compromised. You can't just patch the cracks. You have to excavate the site and lay a new foundation. Excavating meant looking at the truth. the painful truth. That Liam's betrayal wasn't a sudden snap. It was the culmination of 1,000 tiny compromises he'd been making for years. That Chloe's envy had been simmering beneath the surface of our friendship, unnoticed by me. That my parents' love was conditional, tied to a version of success I could no longer provide. And the hardest truth of all, that my own identity had been so deeply enmeshed with theirs that I didn't know who I was without them. The bookstore became my sanctuary, and the books became my teachers. One rainy afternoon, while shelving in the art section, my hand brushed against a book with a stark, beautiful cover. It was called Kintsugi, The Art of Precious Scars. I pulled it out. Kintsugi, the book explained, is the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery by mending the areas of breakage with lacquer dusted or mixed with powdered gold, silver, or platinum. As a philosophy, it treats breakage and repair as part of the history of an object, rather than something to disguise. The cracks are not hidden. They are illuminated. They become the most beautiful part of the piece. I stood there in the dusty aisle, tears streaming down my face. I bought the book with my employee discount. That night, in my shabby apartment, I read it from cover to cover. The philosophy resonated in a place so deep inside me I thought it had died. It wasn't about pretending the damage never happened. It was about acknowledging it, honoring it, and making something new and more beautiful, not in spite of the breaks, but because of them. The next day, I went to a thrift store and bought a cheap ceramic mug for 50 cents. I went home, wrapped it in a towel, and hit it with a hammer. It shattered into 5 pieces. My heart pounded as I looked at the fragments. For the first time in almost a year, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. I felt purpose. My first attempt at kintsugi was a disaster. I bought a cheap kit online and the epoxy was sticky and unmanageable. The gold powder went everywhere. The reassembled mug was a lumpy, grotesque mess with thick, clumsy veins of fake gold. It looked even more broken than when it was in pieces. I almost gave up. The familiar voice of failure whispered in my ear. See, you can't even fix a broken mug. You're useless. But then I looked at the mug and I started to laugh. It was so absurdly, tragically ugly. It was a perfect reflection of how I felt. I kept it. I put it on my windowsill as a reminder. I decided if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. I found a small, quiet pottery studio in an industrial part of the city that offered workshops. The instructor was a Japanese man in his 70s named Kenji Tanaka. He had a calm, centered presence that immediately put me at ease. I showed him my sad, lumpy mug. He examined it with a grave seriousness, turning it over in his hands. He didn't laugh. "The spirit is willing," he said, his voice a gentle rumble. "The hands need to learn the language." So I learned the language. Kenji-sensei taught me that kintsugi was not a quick fix. It was a meditation. It required immense patience. Each broken piece had to be carefully cleaned. The traditional lacquer, urushi, had to be applied in thin, painstaking layers with days of curing time in between each layer. The gold was the final step, a celebration of the scar. The studio became my second sanctuary. The rhythmic work of grinding the lacquer, of carefully aligning the broken edges, of dusting the gold powder with a soft brush was calming. It was the opposite of architecture. Architecture was about imposing a design onto the world, about precision and control from the outset. Kintsugi was about surrender. It was about accepting the reality of the break and responding to it with care and attention. You couldn't force the pieces to fit. You had to listen to them, to understand how they broke, and gently guide them back together. I wasn't just mending pottery. I was mending myself. Each repaired crack was a therapy session. The long, jagged broke on a porcelain bowl was the betrayal of my fiancé and best friend. The spider web of cracks on a shattered plate was the loss of my family's trust. The chipped rim of a teacup was the daily erosion of my self-worth during the months of depression. With each piece I repaired, I was reclaiming a piece of my own story. I was learning to look at the broken places not with shame, but with a kind of reverence. I kept working at the bookstore. Arthur let me display a few of my finished pieces on a shelf near the counter. A small, hand-lettered card explained the philosophy of Kintsugi. People started to notice. They'd pick up a bowl, tracing the golden seams with their fingers. They didn't just see a repaired object. They saw the story. An elderly woman bought a small dish, her eyes full of tears. "My husband passed away last year," she told me. "This feels right." A young man bought a vase for his girlfriend. "We've been through a lot," he said. "I think she'll understand this." I started selling my pieces at the Portland Saturday Market. I set up a small, simple booth. I didn't make much money, not at first, but I had conversations. People would stop and tell me their own stories of brokenness and repair, of illness, of grief, of divorce, of failure. They saw their own lives reflected in my art. My work wasn't about flawless design anymore. It was about flawed connection. It was infinitely more meaningful. My life found a new rhythm. Mornings at the pottery studio, afternoons at the bookstore, weekends at the market. I moved into a slightly nicer apartment, one with enough light for my plants. I adopted a stray cat, a scruffy ginger tom I named Mochi. I made friends, Arthur, Kenji sensei, other vendors at the market, a few regulars at the bookstore. My life was small and quiet, and it was entirely my own. I had laid a new foundation. It wasn't concrete and steel. It was clay and gold and kindness. 4 years passed like this. 4 years of quiet, steady work. I didn't think about Liam or Chloe or my parents often. The sharp, searing pain had faded into a dull, distant ache, the kind you feel in a bone that was once badly broken, but has since healed, stronger than before. They were a part of my history, the break that had led to the gold, but they were no longer my present. Then, one day, an email landed in my inbox. It was a mass mailing from the Oregon chapter of the American Institute of Architects. An invitation to their annual Design Awards Gala. My finger hovered over the delete button, but a name on the list of finalists caught my eye. Havenwood Community Living. Architects, Liam Turner and Chloe Vance, Apex Development. It was them. They had built it, and it was being celebrated. A wave of something cold and strange washed over me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness. It was curiosity. I had spent 4 years rebuilding my life from the rubble they had left behind. I had never seen the thing they had built on top of it. Dr. Sharma had always said that closure wasn't something you receive, it was something you create. Maybe this was the final piece. Not to confront them, not to seek revenge, but to stand in the same room, to see what they had made, and to see how I felt. To know, for certain, that their world no longer had any power over mine. I RSVP'd, yes. The night of the gala, I stood in front of the mirror in my small apartment. I wasn't wearing a designer gown. I wore a simple, elegant black dress made of Japanese linen. My only jewelry was a single irregular pearl on a thin silver chain. My hair, which I'd once kept meticulously straight, now fell in its natural waves. I looked like myself. Not the girl I was, and not the woman I had been trying to be. Just me. The event was held at the Portland Art Museum, a place I hadn't been to in years. The room was buzzing with the self-important energy of the architectural elite. Men in sharp suits and women in architectural jewelry talked loudly, networking, comparing projects. It was a world I had once been desperate to join. Now, I felt like an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe. I got a glass of sparkling water and found a quiet corner, just watching. And then, I saw them. They were standing near the center of the room, holding court. Liam looked older. There were lines of stress around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He wore an expensive, well-tailored suit, but it looked tight on him, like a costume. Chloe was beside him, dressed in a flashy, sequined dress. She was smiling, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She kept scanning the room, a nervous energy about her. They looked successful. They did not look happy. My heart gave a single, hard thump, and then, nothing. The catastrophic, world-ending emotion I expected simply wasn't there. felt a strange clinical detachment. I was looking at two people I used to know a very long time ago. The awards presentation began. I stayed in my corner. When Havenwood Community Living was announced as the winner in its category, polite applause filled the room. Liam and Chloe walked to the stage. Liam took the microphone. He thanked the developer. He thanked the city. And then he started talking about the project's philosophy. He used my words I had written in my thesis, words I had whispered to him in the dead of night, full of hope. He talked about fostering connection, about dignity in design, about building community from the ground up. It was a hollow, corporate echo of my original vision. A ghost, just like the blueprints I found all those years ago. As he spoke, his eyes swept the room, and they landed on me. His voice faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of shock, of confusion registered on his face. Chloe followed his gaze, and her smile froze. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. And maybe she had. The ghost of the person she had thrown away. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I simply held his gaze, my expression calm, serene. I let him see me. I let him see that I was not destroyed. I was not hiding. I was here and I was whole. In that moment of silent, unbroken eye contact across a crowded room, I felt the final chain break. The power he had over me, the power they all had over me, evaporated. It turned to dust and blew away. He finished his speech, his voice strained. They walked off the stage, and I could see them talking urgently, looking back towards my corner. But I was already moving. I didn't want to talk to them. There was nothing left to say. My closure wasn't in a confrontation. It was in my own absolute, unshakable peace. I slipped out of the noisy hall and into the cool, quiet night. The Portland air, once the backdrop to my collapse, felt clean and fresh. I didn't feel victorious in a way that required a defeated opponent. My victory was internal. It was quiet. It was mine. I walked the few blocks back to my apartment, the city lights blurring around me. I thought about the life I had now. My small, bright home, my grumpy cat, my work, which wasn't about building monuments to my own ego, but about honoring the beauty of imperfection. I got home and went straight to my work table. A beautiful celadon vase I'd been working on sat under a cloth. It had been shattered into more than a dozen pieces. I had spent weeks carefully reassembling it. All that was left was the final, delicate task of applying the gold. I mixed the lacquer and the gold powder, the familiar ritual a comfort. With a fine brush, I began to trace the repaired cracks, the intricate network of lines that told the story of the vase's trauma. As the gold filled the seams, the vase was transformed. It was no longer just a broken thing that had been fixed. It was something new. The scars were not flaws. They were golden rivers, a map of its history. It was more beautiful, more unique, more itself than it had ever been before it was broken. And I finally understood. My life wasn't a blueprint that had been ruined. It had been shattered, yes, but I hadn't been erased. I had been given a chance to reassemble the pieces, to find the beauty in the breaks, to fill the cracks with gold. I don't know what happened to Liam and Chloe. I don't know if their firm is successful or if they are happy. I don't know if my parents ever understood the depth of what they did. And the truth is, it no longer matters. Their story is theirs to live. Mine is here, in my hands. My life is not the one I planned. It's smaller. It's quieter. It's not built on grand ambitions or the approval of others. It's built on the quiet, radical acceptance of my own flawed, broken, beautiful self. The victory isn't in getting revenge or proving them wrong. The victory is in the quiet joy of a cup of tea in the morning, the purr of a cat on my lap, and the profound, humbling privilege of taking the broken things of the world and making them beautiful again, not by hiding the cracks, but by tracing them in gold. For anyone out there who feels like their world has been shattered into a million pieces, I want you to know this. You are not ruined. You are being given a new material. The breaks are where the light gets in. The cracks are where the gold goes. And your story, your beautiful, precious